Go back to look at the.
Looks like it worked this time. Okay, cool. We're good to go. All right.
I know I'm gonna have to just do that before.
Get my book closer. Hey guys, I'm on. I got my book all about Yule. Since Yule is coming up tomorrow, seemed like it would be a good chance. Hi Taylor, to talk about some different Yule traditions, and if you have any questions about what to do or need any ideas or in general, it would be a perfect time to ask those questions. So one of the things that I first encountered when I was doing my initial research, well, I can't remember when it was, I've done research periodically, was the fact that in like Ireland and Scotland and all those areas, the reason for the Yule fires and everything was because they believed that the sun went into the ocean. So it sunk into the Western Sea. And of course, things got cold really fast at those latitudes. And they were concerned that the sun would be extinguished between the time it went into the sea and the time it came back out of the sea on the other side of the island. And then there would be no day. That would be the end of everything, and it would be just a long, cold night and the end of the world. And so they kept on. Putting. They did all the fire stuff. This is really a fire festival. So all of the fire things, the lights and everything else are around that notion, that idea that you needed to keep the fires burning throughout the night for the sun to not lose hope and extinguish itself, for the sun to be able to relight its fires when it came up out of the ocean so that it would get strong and grow bright and everything else again. And so that is sort of the reasoning behind most of the Yule traditions. So the putting the candles on the tree initially. Of course, now we don't use that because of it's a fire hazard. The Yule log. The reason why they used the Yule log was because they wanted to make sure that it was a big enough log that it would keep burning all night long. And the people would actually stay awake throughout the long night and chant and sing songs and tell stories to keep the sun interested in staying and coming back and that kind of thing. So they felt it was their duty to keep the world alive, which I think is an interesting perspective on some of that stuff. Hi. Thank you. I did. I dressed in my velvet green and brought out my cloak to show you all my velvet cape I have. So that whole notion of the fire festival and the lights and stuff like that, I mean, most of the northern traditions are based on that. And the farther north you are, of course, the longer the night is. When I lived up north, up in Canada, the sun would come up about, I think, around 10 or so in the morning and go down around 3 where I was. And of course, the farther north you go, the longer that night is. And so it becomes, hi, midnight. Nice to see you here. So it becomes that kind of a recognizing of our journey around the sun and our journey around the year. Of course, if you're south of the equator, this is going to be the longest day for you and the beginning of the return of the darkness. And so it's sort of like the opposite, just that's how our planet is set up. So the things I'm talking about won't apply to you guys. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I mean, I put together a class at one point and put together a bunch of different things about Yule, where it came from, and the word Yule itself seems to be a German source for that, and they have connected the celebration to the wild hunt, the god Odin, and the pagan Anglo-Saxon Madronic or Madronite. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Hi, Leroy. And so the gift giving and all that other stuff was sort of a later tradition. It really wasn't a part of the original pagan tradition of Yule. It was more the gift that we were giving was to the sun, to keep the sun hopeful and to keep the sun alive and that kind of thing. But also it was a good opportunity for people to have a feast. And at this point in the year, you could tell pretty well whether you were going to make it until spring. You know, what the stores were like in the warehouses and how much meat you had left and all that kind of stuff. And so they didn't want people to lose hope. So usually it was a time for having an offering through an ox or whatever kind of food sources that they had at the time. And a time for the community to get together and kind of bolster one another's spirits. Because, knowing that this is the end of the longest night means that there's hope from that moment on that the sun's going to return. And with the return of the light comes the return of warmth, and then eventually spring and all the things that entail. So, the tree inside is a druidic kind of tradition, bringing a tree indoors to invite the nature spirits to come inside. And a lot of times they would hang bells on those trees. So bells became a part of the tradition. And I think they got incorporated into the whole the sleigh bells and that kind of stuff. There are so many different Santa, as it were, traditions, not the newest ones that are coming out around the Odinistic stuff. But China had its own Santa Claus. I mean, there's just a lot of different mixes of traditions that are out there that lend themselves into this entire the mystique and the pageantry and the rituals and so forth that are involved. Could you explain to me what Yule is? Is it just an older name for Christmas? Well, Christmas is a specific word that has to do with the birth of Jesus or Christ. And no, it is not an older word for Christmas. Christmas is a newer term that they attach to this time of year. Yule is specifically the winter solstice, which is tomorrow. Yule happens before Christmas. It's related to our precession of the earth around the sun and the changing of the seasons and the changing of the light. And like I said earlier, Yule was sort of a German word for this time of year. It was the name of the month, I guess, of December when this happens in their language. And that is some of the historical stuff. So the Christmas was moved to close to Yule because the traditions that they're using in their Christmas mythology is very similar to the notion of the sun returning, the rebirth of the sun. In a lot of pagan traditions, the child sun, the early sun, they consider it like an infant. And so it's like that rebirth of light coming light back into the world. And you can see that the similarities are between the Christmas mythology of the sun being born as the infant child, and then the pagan mythology of the sun being reborn and the god coming back as the young child. So all of these traditions are sort of a mix and a mishmash of different cultures, traditions that have been conquered and then redone and remade and reused and absorbed, things transform themselves. And so for me, I try to go back to the origins of what this is about. And it's basically about honoring that shift, that change in how the world forms itself. So, you know, ancient people were very aware of the solstices and the equinoxes. This was how they knew when to plant and what to do and how to prepare and what was coming. And they honored those cycles, the cycles of the seasons and the cycles of the sun as it went around the, while we went around the sun. And so, as it being the darkest night, that means right after this, then the light starts to come back. Every day we get a little more light than we did before. So it doesn't completely return until the spring equinox, or if you're in the south, the fall equinox. It's like the time of equal dark and equal light. So what we're looking at is an opportunity to go into ourselves and to see what it is in us that we want to let go of and leave in this dark. Because from this moment on, once Yule happens, then the light will start to ascend, and we can use that energy of the light coming back to bring new things into us. So, like, we have this during the wheel of the year, we have this during the wheel of the day, or the cycles of the moon. There's always these opportunities to do this kind of thing. So for us, one of the traditions that we do pretty frequently is the idea of leaving behind what doesn't serve you anymore by writing it out and burning it in a fire, because the fire is the tradition for the sun anyway. And you can leave that behind and let it go up in smoke. And then by taking new things in that you want to nurture and grow for the coming season, for the coming year. So you can eat that as a seed in any form that you're comfortable with, whether it's an actual seed. Sometimes we've done hazelnuts. You can do cookies. You can, whatever kind of thing that you have that fits that image of something new that you're imbibing. And seeds are, like I said when we were doing the witches' balls, seeds always represent the akaja, which is potential. So that's the importance of seeds. Seeds have that potential to become something new, something completely different. And unless you know your seeds really well, you can't always tell what they're going to grow into. So what you want to do is to form your ritual around the idea of leaving behind what serves you no longer, what isn't helping you, what is sort of blocking you, keeping you from accomplishing what you want to have happen in your life, and letting that go into the dark, and then bringing new potential in. You don't have to have like a completely formed idea of what your potential needs to be. It's not like a vision board where you try to plot out the entire course of something. It's more that germ, that seed of the idea of what you want to nurture in yourself and allow space in your life to let it happen. And of course, all these things only work if you follow them up with action in the real world. All right. Waxing and waning, king, birth, death, and resurrection. Yep. So, Marisol, hi Siofra, I'm glad you're feeling better. I'm staying in an Airbnb and I get a really bad feeling in one of the rooms. The air is heavy and there are cold spots. Should I burn sage and put out salt? Okay, so it's an Airbnb, so you don't know much about the history of the place, I'm assuming, because you just rented it for the week or the few days or what have you. So I'm thinking in that case, probably some sage would be good to just sort of chase any negative energy out for while you're there. Salt, some people use salt. I don't see the particular purpose in putting salt out. That's sort of been popularized by TV shows and movies and that kind of thing. But if it works for you, and if that is something that's in your arsenal of things that you do in that situation, you just have to make sure that you get it all up before you leave, since it's not your space to leave salt down. You can Okay, everything is going along great. Ian just checked in. He's been sneezing really bad, so he's now going to go in the attic and see where our leaks might still be. So, but if you're gonna do the sage to try and get rid of negative energy, I recommend you do something to fill it up with positive energy. And this time of year, there's lots of scents that are considered positive. I mean, you can just do something simple like cook some apples in a pot and put in some cinnamon with your apples, or make some apple cider, or bake something if you have access to the kitchen stuff. Bring in something that smells, that the smell of it makes you feel good, gives you positive memories and energy and so forth. Because it's not enough to just get rid of negative energy. You have to fill that space up with something else. So then there's no room for the negative energy to come back in. And if there is a spirit there, unless you're planning on trying to figure out how to help cross it over, then, do the basic stuff to keep yourself safe and so forth. I'm not sure what kind of experience that you have in that, and whether you're comfortable with the idea of trying to help a potential human soul that's stuck get to where they need to be. Okay, so Midnight says, my birthday's on the 23rd. I'm glad to hear it's so close to the winter solstice. I wasn't aware of that before. Yeah, that's one of the nice things about paganism. You learn a lot of stuff about what's going on in the world, and it's based in nature and actual cycles and things that happen. And you don't need to have a religion or a faith-based anything in order to celebrate these particular traditions, because you don't need to believe in it. The winter solstice happens whether you believe in it or not, so there's no faith required. That's one of the things I like about paganism. You don't have to believe in rocks. You can pick them up and play with them, or throw them, or rearrange them, or whatever. And it doesn't require a leap of faith in order to believe that they exist. So for me, that's been the attraction from the beginning, that it's based on physical reality and things that I can touch and share and all that other stuff. So Violet says, hello, my apology for being late. Well, you're not too late. It's still pretty early on in it. Midnight says, also, what do you usually do on the winter solstice, Siofra? Do you have any rituals or traditions that you carry out? This year, we're not getting together with family because of the pandemic. And so, we're probably just going to do some basic stuff. I am participating in a ritual with a friend for her to help leave some things behind and create space for new things to grow and to sort of take herself back. So that's what I'm doing this year for winter solstice. And that is pretty much in line with the traditions that I do when we get together. And we've had various things that we've done over the years, going out in a yurt, which I cannot recommend. It had the worst mattress. The things they put in that yurt were the hardest things to sleep on I've ever had in my life. So I will never go there without something to put on it again. But we tried the staying awake all night kind of thing, and singing songs and that kind of stuff. And of course, we're wimps and we fell asleep. So I guess if we were in the old days, it would be our fault if the world came to an end because we couldn't stay awake. But yeah, like I said, it's a fire ritual, and the decorations and things that you can do. This year I haven't gotten into them too much, although I made those witches balls, and I enjoyed doing that. That was fun, and I'm keeping 3 of them, one for the house, one for my husband, and one for me. And then the other 6 that I made, I'm going to give to family and let them put them on their trees and so forth. And I like the idea of being able to put a traditional witch's ornament kind of thing on the tree, so that energy is brought into it. And I tend not to celebrate Christmas at all. I have my own issues with it emotionally because of my childhood and so forth. And becoming pagan and finding Yule to celebrate Yule was a gift for me for that, because then I could get behind the idea of putting things out and gift giving and so forth as a Yule celebration rather than a Christmas celebration. And it helped to sort of untrigger some of my childhood issues. So most years I don't pay much attention to when Christmas is. It's just sort of like out there for some people to do, but not for me. So what I said in the beginning about, burning things, leave them behind, and then eating seeds, cakes, nutritious stuff, having a feast, that kind of thing, to bring in the new light and to sort of set the tone for the year if I feel I have something I'm needing to deal with. As I get older, I don't have as many things that I feel I need to let go of because I've been doing that for so many years. I've been at this, I'd say since the 80s, since the early 80s, I started celebrating Yule and the other the 8 holidays throughout the year, the Sabbats and the Esbats and that kind of thing. So I've done a lot of that kind of work already, so it's, not as urgent for me. So Leroy says, this is amazing, blessed be. What about banging pots and pans some? Oh, that would be for getting rid of negative energy. For the person who was asking about that at the B&B, and yeah, that can work. Or using a broom and sweeping out the negative energy and getting it out of the house. But since it's a rental, a short-term rental, it won't hold, but it might hold long enough for while you're there. So Taylor says, does it make a difference what time you celebrate? Well, it really depends upon how strict your traditions are that you're following. Some people, it's like there's a certain time of day, this is when it happens, and this is it, we got to do it right then, and that's the only time that's appropriate. So if you're a strict individual and you have that idea, then you can look up when winter solstice is exactly, the moment or the minute that it happens, because they have a calculated minute. But in the old days, it's going to be like the night that's the longest amount of night versus day is going to be the right time to do it. So Yule is sort of it's not like the full moon, where you could go right up to the minute of the moon at the full and then the moon starts to wane, but it's like a larger kind of window, I think. And generally speaking, most pagans just celebrate it when they can manage to get together. It's the idea of it, more than the exact timing of it, that is important to us now, because we know at this point that even if we do nothing, the sun isn't going to sink into the ocean and die and then never return. We now understand where we are in our solar system and that the sun is out there doing its thing regardless of whether we pay any attention to it or not. So it's not that same kind of cultural necessity and urgency that they used to have. So that's what I would say. It's like whenever you feel that you can. It's the idea of becoming more aware of the shifts in energy. In acupuncture, for example, whenever there's a change in season, it's usually a good time to go in to get an attunement, because your body's energy shifts with the shifting energy of the planet. So every season brings a somewhat different energy to it, and as the body is going through this adaptation, it's adapting to that change in energy flow and light presence and all the other stuff that's around there. Then you can be more vulnerable to getting sick. And a lot of times people will get a seasonal illness not because they're weak, but more because the shifting energy coming in and going out sort of makes this sort of a confusion in the body system, and sometimes that's how it comes out. So taking care of your health and yourself, getting in a chiropractic adjustment or seeing an acupuncturist and getting your energy flowing in the right direction can help alleviate that and keep it from happening. So that's just one of those interesting kind of things. So Nisha says, I love Yule and dislike Christmas. Yule is all about the light returning from the darkness. Christmas has become so commercial even during the pandemic. Yeah, this is true. So do indigenous First Nations people have different earth-based celebrations this time of year in the Southern Hemisphere? Well, in the Southern Hemisphere, this would not be the longest night, this would be the longest day. And I don't know enough about, I'd have to look at the summer solstice to see what kind of things they might have there, but I'm sure that they do. Certainly, the Aborigines in Australia have a lot of rich cultural and ritual history that they have with working with the dream time and that kind of thing. And I'm sure that as any Aboriginal culture was very aware of what was happening in the earth around them, if there was that kind of a, longest night or longest day, they would have certain things that they would do, but I'm just not aware of what they are. So if there's somebody from down under who can illuminate us on that, or I'll have to do some research to find out, I guess. Let's see. Taylor says, thank you, makes sense. Midnight says, do the Fae behave differently during solstices? Okay, so the Fae have different jobs that they do throughout the year. So it isn't just the solstice that would make them behave differently, but it would definitely be a marker for them as to, how active or how quiet they need to be. Like, here in the Pacific Northwest here, and of course all up and down the coast like that in the coastal communities where we have evergreens and we have deciduous trees, the fairies worked really hard when the leaves were changing and falling off, but then those trees sort of become quiet and still and not active. And so the fairies that are in charge of the deciduous trees aren't doing as much. However, the evergreen trees, they're always doing something. And it's kind of interesting if you look out at a forest this time of year and you can see that vivid green of the different kinds of evergreens that are out there. And when the deciduous trees are all sleepy and just kind of quiet and just hanging back and waiting their time, I can really feel that difference in energy between the two types of trees. And so, everything has to do with where you live, what the life cycles are of the plants and the trees and so forth in your area as to how active the different Fae are going to be, because each one of them is going to have a different kind of a job to do. So for the deciduous fairies, this is a time for them to kind of nurture that tree in quiet until it's getting ready to come back and have its leaves, coming out and getting all excited for spring and warming up the sap and all that other stuff. So that would be my expectation. It certainly has been my experience as far as encounters and the energy of them when it comes to that. So hopefully that clarifies that thing. Violet says, oh my goodness, to hear about shifting energies is so helpful. What stone is around your neck? Okay, this is actually a piece of bone. This is a hand-carved Sarasvati, who's a goddess of purity and knowledge from India, and she is, let me think. I'm always forgetting which one she is. She's one of the triple goddesses of India, and in each of the triple goddesses are kind of like complete and of themselves. So you've got Parvati, Sarasvati, and the guy with the Garuda with Vishnu's consort, Lakshmi. And each one of them have somewhat different energy. And I picked this actually up locally, and it's a really nice detailed carving. And it has her, Sarasvati sits on a white swan. And in this piece, it's too small for them to put the peacock in it. But there's always a peacock nearby, Sarasvati looking on. And Sarasvati has like a scroll in one hand and I think she has a musical instrument as well. So it's so she's like poetry, music, knowledge, and that kind of thing, and purity, because she's all white. She sits on a white lotus. She wears all white, that kind of stuff, and she has a white swan. So they're kind of like all of the images associated with it. So it's actually bone of some kind. So Tam Miranda says, hello, I was wondering something. In the last few days, I've been dreaming a lot about people of my past. Dreaming a lot about the deceased, but look like empty shells. They are not really there, and I was wondering if it's a bad sign. Okay, so, well, see, that's going to be dependent upon your particular dream language that you're using for yourself. I mean, this is a time when things are, like I said, the trees are like empty shells. You could think of them like that. There's not as much life around, depending on where you live. The life is different. The life that's there is the evergreens are the only vibrant things that are around there. Everything else is kind of dim and dull. I don't know if you've got people that have crossed over that you're connecting with. So, interpreting someone else's dream image is difficult because really the best person to figure that out is going to be you. And generally speaking, dreams are just trying to tell you something that your subconscious thinks you need to know, whatever it is. And they can become difficult to have if you're not paying attention to them. So the more you pay attention to your dreams as things go along, the better and less likely you are to have negative dream imagery. My tongue is not working. So, in a sense, the dead are passive and empty because they're not here with us. That could be as simple as that you're having to let go of the idea that they're around you and vibrant. I don't know, I'm just, spinning in the dark as far as that goes. Because, like I said, it's your dream. And I think it's important for people to figure this stuff out on their own because what it might mean to me could be completely different than what it would mean to you because we all have our different internalized mythologies that we're working with, not just cultural mythologies, but also life experience mythologies that we evolve as we grow. So I guess there's not much else I can say about it at this point. I don't know that it would be a bad sign. Doesn't seem to me that it would necessarily be a bad sign. Okay, good. We haven't lost anybody yet. As far as the video is still going. So, let's see if there's anything in here that was okay, this is about feasting and livestock that were killed in connection with it. Heathen Yule practices in a book. Toasts were drunk. This is the Nordic ones. First toast was to be drunk to Odin for victory and power to the king. The second to the gods, Njord and Freyr for good harvest and for peace. And thirdly, a beaker was to be drunk to the king himself. In addition, toasts were drunk in the memory of the departed kinsfolk. And they would tell stories, different sagas and things like that. And that connection with the wild hunt is sort of in there. Neo-paganism has very different origins, and representations can vary considerably despite the shared name. So people sort of decide what they want to do on their own. There are a lot of different traditions. And they say that the date varies. Well, that's true. The date this is a movable holiday because it depends upon when it's actually happening. So it can be anywhere from the 20th to the 23rd. Every year it's slightly different because, it's actually calculated by astronomy and that kind of thing. Nefertiti says, hello, lovelies. The bonfires that were lit in the fields were the same kind of thing as the Yule log. So they would keep the lights burning outdoors and that kind of thing. And the evergreens were sacred to the Celts because they didn't die. Thereby they represented the eternal aspect of the divine, which is kind of cool. I kind of like that. Although I really hate all those cinnamon pine cones they put in the store because I'm allergic to those things and they smell the place up so bad. Half the time I can't get in the store because they put them right out front. Mistletoe is sort of a druidic tradition. And the holly and the mistletoe, like the holly, the red berries of the holly represented in some traditions, The red berries represent the menses of the goddess, the blood of the goddess, and the white berries of the mistletoe represented the sperm of the god. So they were wintertime representations of those two forces out in nature and that kind of thing. Does I have an excellent connection, but no questions? Okay, I'll just keep on talking. Apparently, holly was kept near the door all year long as a constant invitation for good fortune to visit the residence. So, hey, cool. We talked about the Yule log. So there's a lot of different deities of Yule. All the newborn gods and sun gods and that kind of thing. The Dagda and Bridget, the daughter of the Dagda, are some of the gods and goddesses that are, well, she's also a fire goddess, so that would make sense. And Imbolc, which is the next one coming up in February, is sort of sacred to Bridget specifically. Okay, so no one has been saying anything, so I'm worried I've lost some kind of a connection. So if one of you can just say anything at all, so I know it's still working. It says I'm still recording, so I'm assuming that I haven't been disconnected. But generally speaking, it's a bad sign. There we go. Hey, hi. Okay. Thank you. I was just getting worried. Okay. So long as I'm still here, I'm good. Herbs of Yule: bayberry, blessed thistle, evergreen, frankincense, holly, laurel, mistletoe, oak, pine, sage, yellow cedar. Foods of Yule: cookies and caraway cakes soaked in cider, fruits, nuts, pork dishes, turkey, eggnog, ginger tea, spiced cider, wassail, whatever that is, or lamb's wool, ale. Lamb's wool is ale, sugar, nutmeg, and roasted apples. Wow, interesting. Okay. I guess that's what wassail is. Incense of Yule is pine, cedar, bayberry, and cinnamon. Colors are red, green, gold, white, silver, yellow, and orange. The stones are rubies, bloodstones, garnets, emeralds, and diamonds. Ooh, sounds nice. All kinds of nice rocks there, huh? Activities are caroling, wassailing the trees, burning the Yule log, decorating the Yule tree, exchanging of presents, kissing under the mistletoe, honoring Kris Kringle, the Germanic pagan god of Yule. Spell working of Yule, they list peace, harmony, love, and increased happiness. And some other deities: Bridget, Isis, Demeter, Gaia, Diana, the Great Mother, Apollo, Ra, Odin, Lu, the Oak King, the Horned One, the Green Man, the Divine Child, and Mabon, who's a deity in and of himself. He's a Celtic deity. So this is also the time of Saturnalia, which is kind of a different type of festival altogether. Sorry about our lack of questions. Thank you. I'm glad you like my dress, and I'm glad you guys are all there. Just curious, do you know anything about St. Patrick's Day? I think it has to do with the Druids. Well, okay, my mother and I have a difference of opinion about St. Patrick. She insists that St. Patrick was a real person. I insist that he was a made-up person, and it was a story about getting rid of the pagans in Ireland. The snakes that St. Patrick drove out of Ireland are, in my mind, representative of the pagan traditions and things like that were there at the time. So historically, I'm not entirely sure. New information comes to light here and there, but to me, that's generally speaking what that story was all about. So, and it's sort of like with Bridget. Bridget is a saint in the Catholic Church, but she clearly was never a real person. She was the goddess, the great goddess of Ireland, Bridget. And they couldn't, the Catholic Church, when it came into Ireland and started trying to convert all the people there, couldn't figure out how to get rid of her. So there's actually a fair number of churches in Ireland that are dedicated to Bridget because the locals didn't care where they went to worship Bridget, if it was indoors or outdoors. And throughout Ireland, there are sacred wells and sacred fires to Bridget all over the place. Well, there was one sacred fire that a pope had turned off. He had it extinguished because he decided that it was a pagan thing. And it was sort of interesting because there was a group of nuns that actually took over taking care of the fires of Bridget. And he disbanded that convent and that entire order of nuns and had the fires extinguished. And in the last 15, 20 years or so, people have relit those fires and now spend a certain amount of their time tending the fires. The fires of Bridget are traditionally tended by virgins or unmarried women, but it's not a lifetime commitment like with Catholic nuns. And so women would go in, or girls would go in, and they would tend the fires for a period of time. And then when they were ready to go have a family, other younger girls would come in and take over the job of tending those fires. And I was pretty annoyed when I first read about that because this was a sacred fire that had been kept burning for thousands of years. And imagining the kind of energy that would develop in a place like that, where people are just focused on keeping this fire alive and keeping a connection to the spirit and the energy behind the fire. And it's just like how much that would build up over the centuries. And then to have some idiot come along and just throw some water on it seems like a very bad thing to me. Very disrespectful of other people's cultures, which is sort of typical of Catholicism and then the other Christian churches that came in later. It's like trying to supplant whatever they find there and have it declared pagan. Pagan was like a dirty word, If it was pagan, it was heathen, a pagan, or whatever. They were stupid people who didn't know what they were doing, and it's a very arrogant approach to take towards life and other cultures. So yeah. As far as it goes, let's see. Just curious. That was St. Patrick. Hello, Siofra. Yes, we're on. We're here, enjoying your show. Violet says, I plan to commune with the ice dragon of Yule with a bunch of oils suggested and ice water. That sounds fun. Who is the ice dragon? I guess you'll have to ask Violet that question. Marco says, I would love to know your thoughts on techno-paganism. So that means being able to use technology to do rituals and have a coven and stuff like that. It's new to me because I've been more of a hands-on person up until this point, but I see no reason why it cannot work, why there can't be some real energy exchange between people. We were doing our rehearsal today for the ritual for tomorrow for my friend, and I'm sure that when we do it tomorrow, it's going to have a pretty intense effect and good energy and so forth associated with it for the person we're doing it for. And I participated in a healing ceremony from another witch online, and I was surprised about how much energy that I could feel with that when I was doing that. So I think that there is an opportunity there for people who can not meet in person to be able to have some kind of communication and energetic exchange from a distance. But I don't know much about other aspects of it at this point. Ishava says, hello, I missed the first 30 minutes. Did you speak about the conjunction of the two planets happening tomorrow and their energy impact on us? And also coinciding with the winter solstice. I think it's Jupiter and Saturn. That will be very close. And yes, it is. And no, we hadn't talked about that yet. And, a conjunction is always a cool thing, being able to see it from here. It's going to be the closest it's been in 800 years. And it's going to be less than a degree apart. So Jupiter and Saturn are going to be almost eyeball lined right up with each other. Jupiter is closer to us, Saturn is farther away. The energy of the two planets is sort of the opposite, where Jupiter is kind of like the expanding, generous, overflowing kind of planet, and Saturn is considered the constricting, limiting, setting boundaries kind of thing. And those are the positive aspects because we need boundaries as well as we need expansion. My idea is the two of those together will help us to set effective boundaries without losing our sense of generosity and community. And that's what we really need. We need to be able to have safe, effective boundaries for ourselves and our own lives and our loved ones, especially in the middle of a pandemic. But we also don't want to lose the connection of the community, you know, that's out there. We need to have better ways to have community. And so that would be my idea. I'm not an astrologer. And so, and having it on the winter solstice is just way cool because this is a time of shifting and changing and of the dark being an ascendant and leaving. And so you can look at that from a symbolic point of view, that coming back into the light with that conjunction will mean we'll be bringing the positive aspects of both of those planets into the influence of the planet itself, of us, because, we're sort of in the direct line with that energy as it's moving around. So that's what I would think. I don't think that this is what was considered the Christmas star at all, because the descriptions that I've read in the past of that, it sounds more like a comet that happened during that time period. And of course, comets were considered omens of all kinds of things. But I think it's funny they're calling this the Christmas star, probably because it's the winter solstice, I'm assuming. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on it. Like I said, I'm not an astrologer, and everyone's going to have different perspective of that. So let's see. Cynthia says, could you share with us and Yule or solstice songs to sing at the fire? I don't know if I'm ready for singing yet, but yeah. Oh, the summer days are gone with the sun, with the sun. Oh, the summer days are gone and the winter lingers on, and we hunger for the dawn of the sun, of the sun. Oh, the days are never bright. Where's the sun? Where's the sun? Oh, the days are never bright. Every night a longer night, and we hunger for the light of the sun, of the sun. So that would be one of my favorite songs for this time of year. Our group usually started singing it on the fall equinox. And so we have 3 months that we can sing it, and the last day we can sing it is on winter solstice. So I like that one. The other songs I use are more, easily found. This one was in a songbook, a bard's songbook, and I'm able to read music well enough to figure out what the tune was, and it's based on an old melody. And I just love it, thought it was wonderful. So that would be that. Hopefully I wasn't too bad. And as far as food for nature spirits, well, the seeds and, whatever you happen to be eating, it's always a good idea, to take a portion of that food and just give it to nature as an offering, or put it out on a plate, for the spirits to take. Just recognizing the fact that they're there. We know that they don't eat the food and they don't need the food, but it's that energetic offering that makes it a thing. It's like it's our attitude towards it and our desire to give it that makes it special for the nature spirits being recognized. And so sort of like a line of communication that they're very familiar with, since it's something that primitive people and Aboriginal people have done for thousands and thousands of years. So I don't think the specific food is as important as the offering of it in itself. Thank you. Let's see. So I got a book called Year of the Magical Dragon. That's Violet talking. And there is lore about a dragon named Faerie. It says ice dragons over a specific name, so more seasonal dragons. Okay. I love dragons myself. I've met a couple of them here and there. So Nisha says we're going to ask you to sing every week now. Well, at least this week I have a voice because I didn't before. That was really weird, losing my voice for 2 weeks. Bravo! Yay. Thank you. That was lovely. I'm so glad you guys liked that song because I definitely like that song a lot. So, let me think. Is there anything else interesting in my book here? So Pliny wrote that Druid elders performed rituals in which they harvested mistletoe from oak trees with golden sickles. It was collected under a waxing moon phase and then fed to animals to guarantee their fertility. As part of the rite, a pair of white bulls were sacrificed, and if prayers were answered, prosperity would be visited upon the villages. Oh, I imagine those bulls weren't too happy about that, but a pair of white bulls, they'd have to have 2 albinos. That would be rare. I know that there's a lot of stories about albino animals. The Native Americans have the one about the white buffalo being a significant symbol of things shifting and coming to a certain place in their mythology and legends and stuff like that. So, so there's a little thing here that says Jesus and the naughty mistletoe. As the Roman Empire crumbled and Christianity spread, a rumor began in France that the cross upon which Jesus died was made of mistletoe. As punishment for its involvement in the crucifixion, the plant was forbidden to grow out of the earth and was demoted to being a botanical parasite. It now has to have a host plant, such as the oak or the ash, apparently more well-behaved and virtuous trees. I think is it the mistletoe that killed Bard, was it? Or Branwen? I think that there might be something in there about that. So, yeah, there's all sorts of wonderful different stories about things. Well, we've already talked about that because that's just sort of obvious why the winter and solstice became immensely important, because they weren't sure that they were going to survive through the winter. And when I lived up north, I've had this idea when I lived about 1,000 miles north of Vancouver, British Columbia, in the bush, and living in a place where it's minus 40 for at least 6 weeks out of the winter is an interesting experience. And the notion that we could use the out of doors as a freezer, was definitely in my mind. I figured that would be a given because you're going to get your cold weather and it's going to stay until it isn't cold anymore. But where we lived in the wintertime, there would be a 2-week period sometime in January or February, sometimes like the end of January, the beginning of February, somewhere in there, where it would suddenly warm up to above freezing. And it was a very bizarre experience to have all of a sudden it warmed up like that. And I had this notion that, when bears hibernate, they don't hibernate, they hibernate, that, they stayed like in their cave and then didn't come out until spring. Well, when we would have our midwinter thaw, bears would wake up because it got too warm. And the grizzlies would come out and start wandering around town trying to look for food, and they'd be very, very grumpy because there really wasn't any food because everything was pretty much still covered in snow. So it was sort of interesting to be in a place where the notion of, my naive notion of how things worked from what I learned in school and books and stuff like that met the reality of how things actually were when I lived up there. And so that was sort of a, nature is more complicated than we present it when we're doing our rituals and that kind of thing. I don't know why I'm talking about this at the moment, but it just seemed appropriate somehow, thinking about some of the different traditions and stuff that are out there. So that show Northern Exposure, the place I lived was sort of like that. We had moose walking downtown all the time, and you never knew when you were going to see wild animals. And I think that helped me a lot because I lived in a place where there were more wild animals that were dangerous, potentially hazardous to my health than there were people that lived there. We only had about 500 people that lived in the entire valley, and most of them were at the village. The rest of us were spread out. My nearest neighbor was a mile and a half away. And so, I lived in the middle of the woods. And wintertime was interesting because the first place I lived there in the valley was a crazy cabin. It was a modified A-frame on stilts on top of a hill overlooking the river, which is like the worst construction you can even imagine for where we lived, where it would get that cold. The guy who had the cabin built, it was like his fishing cabin for 2 or 3 weeks out of the year when he came up to do steelhead fishing. And he wanted to have a cabin that reminded him of his cabin when he was a kid in North or South Carolina. So this was not a very well constructed cabin. And the person who built it didn't know what they were doing yet with logs. They just stacked logs on top of each other without cutting them down, so there was no flat area. I mean, generally when you build a log cabin, you have to get rid of that curve, and you put something in between your logs. And so my walls were like 18 inches thick, and I could see outside. It was like that. And then the loft upstairs was basically 2x4 standing on end this way, so they were just stacked like this on top of each other. And there were holes in between them. There was no insulation or anything like that. And the logs were put up green, which is a really bad thing to do. And so that place was so cold. We had a really good quality heater. It was a Fisher stove. And we did what we could to try and keep the heat in. We put up plastic above the kitchen to try and keep the heat down. We put hay around the bottom of the where the stilts were to try and keep the wind from coming in. The floor was basically a subfloor. There was no insulation in the floor either. So the wind would come in underneath the cabin, then come up through the floor and then shoot up, and then the heat would go straight up to the top and then leave the house. So we could have that thing going as hard and fast as possible, and you could be standing next to it with your hands like inches from the stove and hardly get any heat at all. It was just quite bizarre. And so a couple of times I was in the cabin and the wind would be blowing outside. There's this really cold biting wind. It's it's 40 below, and the wind is roaring through the cabin and creaking and all this other stuff. And I have this vision, this sudden realization that here I am, this tiny little person, and I have this tiny little fire in this house, and there's all these ice giants outside blowing on my cabin, trying to kill me and make me freeze to death, and the only thing that's keeping me alive is this little bitty fire. So it was interesting because it really gave me a connection to some of the Nordic mythology and why, it made perfect sense in that experience that would be real. And then with the cabin wood not being cured enough, when the nighttime would hit and we'd be trying to sleep in the loft, and then all of a sudden the logs would start splitting because they would get frozen and the ice would go through the log and crack, make these gigantic exploding sounds in the middle of the night, and you're laying there and the whole place is like one explosion after another, wondering if the thing is going to fall down around your ears. So it was certainly a very interesting experience, and it makes you really appreciate being in a house with running water and centralized heat. It's wonderful. I love it. Don't think I want to do that again, but I'm glad that I did, because it definitely gave me that sense that life is fragile, and if you're not paying attention, it can be gone in an instant, and there's no point in being lazy about it. It's like in some of the other houses I lived, it's like wake up in the morning and there's ice on the water barrel in my kitchen, and I have to get out from under the covers in a cold house and get the fire started, and you don't feel like it. but if you don't do it, you're not going to survive. You're going to die. So the idea of not doing something just because you don't feel like it kind of evaporated pretty quickly in me. So, it's knowing that you're a part of this larger biosphere definitely gives you a different approach and a different attitude towards all those things that are happening. And I think a lot of us are so stuck in cities where we don't have that kind of interaction with wild animals. I mean, we had black bears and brown bears and grizzly bears and wolves and eagles, bald eagles and golden eagles, owls, ravens, cougars, bobcat, moose, which are very dangerous when they're in rutting season, fox. I mean, we had all kinds of different animal groupings that were out there that you had to be aware of and pay attention to. So it sort of created this alertness, I think, in me and my children as well, because they were raised in that. And it sort of gives you that more of an overview of what it means to be a person and not be the only thing around. So that makes me think of that because it's, winter solstice. So I know spring is typically associated with fertility, but is there any way to use this energy and time to boost fertility? Well, yeah, actually, wintertime is the most common time for people to get pregnant, so I would say yes. That's and traditionally that's because people were stuck inside and they didn't have anything else to do and they needed to keep warm. So, yeah, I don't see why not. Excellent singing, thank you. Let's see. How do you manage to move into the bush? It's a brave thing to do. Oh, that was one of those things that it was at that time in my life. Everywhere I ended up was because I was with somebody and they wanted to go there. So that's how I ended up there. I'm not unhappy with the fact that I was there. I think that was very good for me. That was during the time I was doing a lot of channeling. And David, who I was with, wanted to join an intentional community, and he found a community in British Columbia that was looking for new members, which we ended up not joining. And when I left my husband and got my divorce and stuff like that in Saskatchewan, I moved to British Columbia with David because he had me, I was doing channeling like constantly all the time. I'd say every couple of days or so, and he was transcribing everything that I said, and that was sort of like my job, and I was his PhD dissertation, which he failed to complete in time, so he never did get his PhD in psychology, but still. It was an interesting time for that, but moving out into the wilderness was very good because I remember as a kid living in Rhode Island, one of the things I liked was going out into the woods a lot. That was sort of when we lived on base. But I was there from first grade through the beginning of 8th grade. So there was a period of time I remembered being out in the woods a lot. And so being out in nature was very healing for me. And like I said, definitely learning about what nature actually is and how dangerous it can be, and how you need to pay attention to what's going on around you and not take things for granted. So yeah, the one place I lived I had to chop about 7 cords of wood to get through the winter. That was just to get through the winter. I used wood year round for cooking and stuff like that because I had a cook stove and everything. And I'm not sorry I did it. I don't think I'd want to do it now because I don't want to chop that much wood again. But yeah, it definitely got you into it sort of, a lot of society stuff kind of fell away living there because, I didn't have, we had radio at one point when we brought a car battery in. So we would listen to radio plays sometimes, but there was no TV and not much in the way of radio. There were really very few distractions except survival. And I'm always surprised when people wax. They think that, oh, the good old days when we didn't have to do all this stuff. Well, there may be things about society that aren't much fun when it comes to certain kinds of things, but ancient times were replete with dangers and death and hardship, and just because you didn't have to go to work 9 to 5 didn't mean you weren't working for, 18 hours a day trying to harvest what food there might be available, go hunt and get your stuff, make your leather to make your clothing so that you don't freeze to death, take care of basic needs and so forth. And, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's not as easy as we like to fantasize it should have been or could have been or might have been, or how movies might make it look like it was. Living in the woods is a lot of work, and it's dangerous, and you have to be careful. So, yeah. That's how I ended up there, though. It was a guy. He moved me out there. And then I ended up doing what I did, so. Is there such a thing as snow spirits, or are they water spirits? I've never thought of that. I mean, the snow is definitely an interesting experience, but I would imagine, I've not seen them specifically. It's like the environment is very different when there's snow. It does things to the world, makes things very quiet. It absorbs all the sound, and it reflects light in an interesting way and makes things sparkle and stuff like that. So I imagine that there probably are, there's storm spirits. So if it's a storm, I would say yes, because every storm, hurricane, and whatever is going to have a spirit that is sort of pushing it where it's supposed to go and warning nature spirits in its path that it's on its way, that it's coming. At least that's what I got from Dora Van Gelder's book, Real World of Fairies, and it seems like that's the case. I've seen larger spirits up in the atmosphere, like I was on an airplane once and looked out the window and saw an air dragon in the jet stream, and it going by the plane. So, and I was like, oh, well, okay then. So I'm thinking that, on the other planes and the invisible realms, or whatever we want to call them, the forces of nature have their beginning as these movements of these different types of spirits, and then we get the physical results, like the snowstorm, or the change in weather, the movement of high and low systems, and that kind of thing around the planet. So yeah, I guess that would be sort of an answer. Hi, Suzanne. So Nisha says, how long did you live in that poorly made log cabin? I think it was almost 2 years, actually. We had to leave the cabin when he came up fishing. That was part of the rule. So we had to go live with somebody else for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it was, which was sort of weird that we had to vacate our house and go live with someone else for a couple weeks. So we did that once. I think by the time he came back the second time, we found a different place to live. And I think from that house, someone local told us about a trapper's cabin that was empty, and it was at the other end of the valley, and it was a very small space, so it was really easy to heat. In fact, it was so easy to heat, we sometimes had to have the door open so we wouldn't get roasted alive in there, especially if we were cooking and whatnot. And that was a very creative thing we had to do with our furniture, putting a bed on top of dressers because there wasn't room for all of them. So we made the dressers into a platform for the bed, kind of thing. But that was a neat cabin. I liked the fact that it was warmer. Of course, it also had an outhouse. And that was where I met the cedar tree that became my first wand. There was a little grove of trees down by a creek, not far from the cabin. And in the summertime and so forth, I would go down there every day, and I would sit in front of the cedar tree. For some reason, I was attracted to the cedar tree, and I would sit in front of it and meditate. And the 4 trees, there were 4 different kinds of trees. It was like this amazing little mini circle, and then the stream, and then across the stream was the deep woods. And every so often, I would look across the stream, and I would have visions of other things. The woods would disappear, and I'd see something completely different. One time, I saw a hill, a grassy hill, and I saw a unicorn at the top of the hill, which I thought was pretty cool. So yeah, every place had its own thing you had to try and get used to and work with. And then we ended up getting, the community wanted us out of that place. After David and I broke up, I was just me and the kids that were there. And in the wintertime, they wanted to kick us out, which was I thought illegal because, if you have nowhere to live when you live in a place where it's minus 40, you're dead. It's not like, okay. And they wanted to log the place. And that's when I found the house down by the river. So I managed to move from there to the house down by the river, and then later they burned the cabin down that we stayed in. But it had served a purpose for a lot of people in the area. The trapper it was a much smaller place for the trapper, but then a family moved in and put in an addition, which wasn't very big either, but it was bigger that way. And a lot of people over the years had squatted in that cabin, and so it was like rent free, which we needed at the time. And again, right in the middle of the woods. When I was there, I was in the deep, deep forest. So it was in the wintertime, it was particularly quiet, but it was generally pretty quiet all the time. And when we moved to the house by the river, that took a lot of adjustment because I wasn't used to hearing the sound of running water going by. And in the wintertime, it would be totally quiet because the whole river would freeze solid. And then when spring would hit and the river would break up all within about an 8-hour period, which was quite dramatic, and the water would start flowing, then it would be really loud as these large cottonwood trees would be flowing down the river and hitting the bank by the house. Because apparently the river had changed course before I moved into the house, and it used to go just straight by, but they had a big flood and it changed course, so it came this way straight at the bank and then made this 90-degree turn, so we were losing land every spring. And I'd had nightmares of the house landing in the river and floating out to the Pacific down to Port Root. See, Port Orford is here. I can't remember the name of all the towns at this point for some reason. It escapes me, but out to the sea. So yeah, that was pretty exciting. And it was interesting because each place had its own energetic signature because, it's like the one with the river, the energy changed throughout the year. And the one in the deep woods, it kind of stayed the same all year round as far as the sounds, the quiet, and so forth. And I could actually hear the sun rising. It's hard to explain when you live in a place like that. There's actually some kind of an energetic tone that happens when the sun comes above the horizon that I would sense. Okay, so Ty says, do you have any recommendations for tomorrow with the solstice and the grand conjunction? We'll have a good time. Have your friends over if they're safe, or not if they're not. Do it online. Have a nice big feast. Celebrate the fact that the sun is coming back. It's weird to me that this is the official start of winter, because this is really the official start of winter stopping. This is like the middle of winter in my mind. Do something simple. Light a candle, light a fire, burn things you want to leave behind to leave in the dark, and have some cookies and charge them up to bring in new things for the future. Think about what you'd like to have and just sort of be open to the change. That's the thing. It's like accepting the fact that the energy is changing and is going to be different. If you allow that into yourself and let that happen, there's, and not fighting the process, there's less likelihood of having a seasonal illness and that kind of thing, I think. So, yeah, if you have family to spend it with and they're in your bubble, and go forth and spend it with them. If not, do it online or something like that, so that you can connect and enjoy the energy and not worry about what the changes might be that are coming. It's like the energetic shift happens every year, and maybe a little stronger this year because of the Jupiter and Saturnian conjunction kind of thing. So Ty says, I finally found a place to stay. I'm safe now. Oh, good. I was the one that got kicked out last time. I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you for letting us know, because I was kind of worried about you, because it sounded like a potentially hazardous situation. So that means that you're free to sort of do what you want for this celebration. You don't have to worry about other people in the house getting upset with you for doing pagan-like things or anything like that. So then you can just do what you want. That would be nice. And definitely being safe is good, I'm glad. So, let's see. Coming up on an hour and 15 minutes. Trying to think if there's anything else to share with you guys. Kind of fun talking about being up in the woods, though. Makes me think about it because of the change in the weather. We have a storm today, and last night it's been raining. We don't get the snow here, but we get the rain for sure. And rain makes me feel like, indoorsy. It was really painful for a little bit, but it's brought me closer to spirit. And yes, the family that I am with are super open-minded and loving. Oh, good. I'm very glad to hear that. Do they have any traditions that they do this time of year that you could participate in with them? Or, you can certainly tell them about, some of the stuff that you're learning if you think that they're open to it. But just doing simple things, especially in the beginning, it's an acknowledgement of the shifting energies and stuff. So that's what you want to acknowledge, that light returning and the longest night leaving and all that stuff. I always look forward to when the sun starts coming up earlier. Keep things going along. But they're Christian but believe in past lives and the spirit realm. Ha! Okay. I loved hearing about your experiences and stories. Yeah, I've got a lot of them. I've done some tarot readings for them. Well, that's interesting. It's always interesting when they have that mix of stuff. So maybe just doing like a candle lighting of your own, and you're just coming out of a negative experience from the last time we were here, so you can put that on paper, and let go of that, let go of the hurt and everything else associated with it, and put that into the fire and let that burn and stay in the dark, and then have some kind of a treat for yourself and see that as bringing new things in, new possibilities for your new life, and new hope and so forth, so that you have that to look forward to as things open up for you. And it doesn't have to be specific. It can be sort of general, and just being open to the changes and new things coming your way. It'd probably be a good thing to do. And it doesn't have to be like a full-on ritual and fancy or anything like that. Just something simple to acknowledge the shift of the timing seems perfect. So I'm glad to hear that you're safe. Yeah, I've had definitely a lot of experiences in my life at this point. So that's good. I survived a lot. Being sick was very strange. I thought I was going to end up, I don't know how many of you have watched the shamanic dismemberment thing that happened to me, but I was back in that state when I was sick because all of my defenses were down, and it was I was very vulnerable to potential hallucinations and all kinds of other things, but I was able to keep it together and didn't have to take myself to the hospital, so that was good. But it was very weird. So I feel normal again. I'm almost 100% back. I still feel like I have a little bit of energy lack compared to my normal energy level, but it's just a little bit at this point. So I'm pretty much back to where I was. So I'm good. I'll definitely try it. I was planning on doing something with Persephone's help. And Nisha said, yes, that was too intense what you went through. Yes, it was. I did not like that at all. So glad to be healthy again. Yeah. So we learn, we live and learn. If we live, we learn. If we don't live, I guess we learn too and we come back, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, that made no sense. Anyway. So, I'm thinking that this is probably a good place to stop at this point. if we have any other quick questions that I need to answer. But I have definitely enjoyed doing these live shows with you guys, and thank you for making me sing. I appreciate it. Alrighty then. I think we covered the subject adequately. Okay, Hi says, I just recently received a pair of earrings and my friend decided to keep on ear of each. So it's one ear black tourmaline, one ear labradorite. Do you have any advice for being crystal work? Well, knowing what the properties of it, looks like those earrings are good. So you got one of each. I see. Okay. Well, black tourmaline will protect you from negative entities and energy coming in, and labradorite will reflect energy away from you that's negative. Both of them are protective, so you can sort of decide which one. And when you're doing crystal work, we'll have to do more. I did a video on working with crystals, so thank you, the yellow corner. See, I have my hood and everything. Like, I got my hood. Woo! Go disappear and be gone. Ta-da! There we go. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and wisdom. You are a real gift to all of us. I hope you and Ian stay safe and well. Happy Yule and blessed be. Thank you, Nisha. Thank you for going live. It's always refreshing to see you. Ooh, snap. Yep. Okay, guys. Have yourself a wonderful Yule and enjoy whatever celebration that you do tomorrow. And we'll talk to you guys again next week. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me at shifrasmagicalcove@gmail.com. I actually just didn't get any specific questions this week. So, yes, I'm actually doing coconut water to help stay hydrated. So, yay for that. So, bye, guys. Lovely seeing you all, and blessed be to everybody.